In and about the Easter story, there were many who literally touched Jesus, which must have been really an amazing thing to do when you think about it, to touch God in human skin. That really happened many times over. And I wonder if anyone who touched the physical body of Jesus ever was the same. For instance, the first to touch Jesus in the Easter story was one of his closest friends, a man by the name of Judas. Because Judas was such a common name, the town from which he came, Iscariot, usually identified him. He was Judas of Iscariot. And like that, he was most like Jesus. You know, Jesus had a common name, and Jesus was identified usually from his hometown. He was Jesus of Nazareth. Well, Jesus saw great potential in this man, Judas, and invited him to become a part of his group of 12 disciples. Jesus even made him his treasurer, and yet Judas never really quite fit in the group. He never fully believed. He was loyal to Jesus during the good times, but became a traitor when things didn't quite go his way. He decided to sell out Jesus to his enemies one day for 30 coins of silver, and the conspiracy was to tell Jesus a secret place in the Garden of Gethsemane outside Jerusalem and to identify Jesus to the police so that they would be sure to get the right man, the one that they wanted. The signal arresting Jesus was to simply be a kiss. Matthew chapter 26, verses 47 through 50. While Jesus was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived. With him was a large crowd, armed with swords and clubs, sent from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had arranged a signal with them. The one I kiss is the man, arrest him. Going at once to Jesus, Judas said, "Greetings, Rabbi," and kissed him. Jesus replied, "Friend, do what you came for." Then the men stepped forward, seized Jesus, and arrested him. What a loser. I mean, he could have gone into history and into eternity with a kiss of loyalty, but instead he went out into history and into eternity with a kiss of betrayal. But Judas touched Jesus with a kiss. After he was arrested, Jesus was tried and convicted of capital offense, even though he was innocent. And rather than acknowledging that he was indeed the Son of God and the Messiah, the guards tried to exercise control over Jesus with physical abuse. Luke's Gospel, chapter 22, verses 63 through 65. The men who were guarding Jesus began mocking and beating him. They blindfolded him and demanded, "Prophesy, who hit you?" And they said many other insulting things to him. Can you imagine standing in the presence of one of the most famous and powerful persons in the world and making fun of him? They blindfolded Jesus, they punched him, they asked him to guess who it was that hit him, and Jesus could have called down 10,000 angels to protect him and zap them, but he didn't. Jesus took the assault. How pathetic. I mean, they could have fallen on their knees and worshiped Jesus, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, but instead they beat him up, they made fun of him. Jesus' next step on the Easter journey was an execution hill just outside the city gate. He was turned over to a team of experienced Roman executioners. By the time they first touched Jesus, he was in pretty bad shape. He had been severely beaten back in the city, and so severely that everyone could see that he wouldn't last long when crucified. Now for the soldiers, of course, it was simply a job. It wasn't up to them to decide if the prisoner was guilty or innocent. It was their job. to kill him. That's what they were being paid to do. They followed a standard procedure. They would strip the prisoner of his clothes, lay him back on a cross, bend his arms, find the soft spot in his wrist, drive a spike through the wrist, then bend the knees, drive a third spike through both feet, lift the criminal up on the cross and drop it into a socket in the ground, and then there they would keep guard until the prisoner was dead. Luke's Gospel, chapter 23, verses 32 through 37. Two other men, both criminals, were also led out with him to be executed. When they came to the place called the Skull, there they crucified him along with the criminals, one on his right, the other on his left. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." And they divided up his clothes by casting lots. The people stood watching, and the rulers even sneered at him. They said, "He saved others, let him save himself, if he is the Christ of God, the chosen one." The soldiers also came up and mocked him. They offered him wine vinegar and said, "If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself." What must it have been like to hold Jesus down and feel his muscles and his skin, and they looked into his eyes and they literally nailed his body to the cross? You know, in one way I am just astounded at the horror of what they did, and yet I'm glad they did, because when Jesus died, he paid the price for my sin. And there's an uncomfortable sense in which all of us really were the executioners. It was their job, but it was our sin that crucified Jesus that day.